Life can be fast-paced, strenuous, and flat-out overwhelming. Life transitions and taboo topics can make it hard to catch your breath. Welcome to Breathe, a podcast that enables you to slow down, get your bearings, and engage in real conversations where no topic is off limits. Breathe is presented by Breath of Life, hosted by David Person and speaker-director Pastor Deblier Snell.
Welcome to Breathe. I'm David Person, sitting here, yes, in a different studio setup.
Different, yeah.
And that's because when the cat's away, the mice will play.
Of course.
Pastor Nugent has decided that with Pastor Snell out on the West Coast, hanging out with Jay-Z, Beyonce, LeBron, and surfing and swimming. Hollywood, the Hollywood pastor. That we could just go ahead and try to create a little fun for us, because we're not happy that we're missing out on that.
Yeah, we want to have a little something special here.
Right.
Yeah.
So we don't have LA, but we've got a new studio.
That's right.
There you go.
We got BOL.
Listen, guys, I wish I was not overlooking the Pacific right now. I wish I was there with you guys, man. Listen, man, I would give up this 75-degree, humidity-free weather to be there with my brothers in a heartbeat, man. But duty calls me here.
Listen, duty calls, and we are so excited for the blessing of technology that allows us still to interact in this way. This is still pretty cool.
But I have to say this: the next time you preach on the seventh commandment, I'm going to remind you of this statement that you just made.
Right.
That you'd rather be here with us than out there. I'm going to remind you.
Come on.
Oh man, listen, man. I love my brothers and the Breathe family. Amen.
Amen.
Well, we miss you, but we're glad you're out there doing God's work. And I'm also very happy that this podcast is nimble. We're nimble. We're agile. We can react to the news and to what's going on in current events. And so Pastor Snell has presented us with the challenge this morning.
Very much so.
Digging into a real serious current event topic.
Yeah.
And that is, we all know what happened very recently. With the assassination attempt on former President Trump.
That's right.
And then, interestingly enough, now that's followed with the decision by current President Biden to step down as the Democratic nominee and candidate for the presidency.
So he's not seeking re-election.
He's not looking for re-election.
Those are big.
And now Vice President Kamala Harris is poised. She is really, as of today, she's considered the presumptive Democratic nominee.
That's correct.
So we want to delve into that a little bit, Pastor Nugent with Pastor Snell. Vice President Kamala Harris is actually from the West Coast.
That's right.
She's a Californian. What are you hearing out there, Pastor Snell, about people's reaction to her ascension to this position? Let's start there, and then we'll work our way
backward. Yeah.
Oh man, no, it's actually, there is a tremendous energy. There is a groundswell. There is it's an interesting hopefulness. And I don't know that I had quite picked up on. So I think, you know how sometimes there is the reaction of Capitol Hill and those who are in the business of politics. And sometimes there can be a disconnect from the ground and where people actually are. But I think being out here, I think you sense that there was certainly a despair, a reticence about moving forward under the leadership of Biden. And I think that there is kind of a euphoria, a hopefulness. And I wouldn't quite put it perhaps on the level, at least as of yet, of where things were when they peaked under the hopefulness of President Obama. But there is certainly something in the air, and you can sense a movement afoot, at least here on the ground here in California.
That's interesting. That's it's completely counter to what I've heard here in the South, in Alabama. Some people are kind of on the fence. They don't feel she has enough time to really, display and exemplify her characteristics and attributes that really qualify her for this leadership position, the highest leadership position in the land. But then also, there is a very loud conversation around why did it take Biden this long? I mean,
Islam. Yeah.
that's a very loud conversation as well. And then of course there's even yet still all of these are connected. Another conversation around the fact that there was an assassination attempt really
Yeah.
has boosted the profile and stature of the opponent to a level where some feel like maybe we can't catch him. So there, all of it is kind of in concert. That's why I feel like all
Yeah.
of the different topics that we're going to touch on in this podcast episode, this discussion, are related, up to and including my initial reaction thinking about the first African American nominee for
Female.
a female.
Yeah.
There you go, female nominee for the Democratic National Party. My immediate thoughts go back to, will she be protected? There are
Ooh.
those. I mean, we have seen literally in the last week, somebody tried to assassinate former President Donald Trump. With that kind of atmosphere already, that groundwork already laid, and we have this person who, in some corners of the country, will be seen as a polarizing figure, somebody that they are not interested in seeing ascend to this again highest office of the land. If we eliminate the conversation of the possibility of an attempt, I think we would be naive. And so my mind immediately went to, will she be protected? Will she? How will she be able to do the campaign trail? Will she be able to do the stops? Will Secret Service even allow her to go to certain places? How will that work? Biden was one thing, and having her as the second, but now with her as the lead on the ticket, it does bring to bear some of those concerns as well.
Yeah. Wow.
All valid points, and let's also remember that even though we ascribe to her the label of being African American,
This is
she
true.
also has Asian heritage.
That's correct.
Asian American heritage as well.
Correct.
Pastor Snell, let me ask you about since Pastor Nugent brought up the assassination, let's now go back to that, because that was,
Sure.
of course, the event that I think was the initial in this sort of, I'll say, macro news cycle. That was sort of the initial event that captured the nation's attention. What are your thoughts about what happened about that incident, and then also as a part B to my question, what do you think about the effort, the conscious effort, to make former President Trump almost a messianic figure in the aftermath of that assassination attempt?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think as you're consuming this, like, you are trying to process it in real time. And so honestly, it was, you know, maybe I shouldn't say this. I think initially there was a part of me that wondered if there is a stunt element to this at first. Just because it's just so hard to believe that these kind of things happen in these United States. And then I think the other thing that kind of came to my mind biblically is what Solomon says, is that there's nothing new under the sun. What has been will be again. So much so that I think that if we think back, that there was an actual assassination of a president in Kennedy, and then there was also, I think, an assassination attempt against Ronald Reagan. And I think that one of the things that we see even with this, the assassination attempt, kind of the MAGA movement, is just that, history kind of operates with these strange cycles, so that some of the rhetoric, some of the commentary, actually, if you were probably to pick up a newspaper, from 1963 or 1968, some of those same ideas are simply being relived or resurfaced again, which is something that I think is very strange. And honestly, and again, as a Christian, as a person of compassion, we're grateful that the former president was not assassinated, because I think that would have brought a whole different series of woes into the land, and of course,
Agreed.
certainly to his family
Agreed.
more acutely. But I do think that, it was kind of hard to watch, while you're still in danger, the preening and the boasting when the Secret Service is trying to kind of move you off and get you into safe space. That's an interesting way to manage that and handle that. But I do think that, it is really strange, because I'm thinking what the Bible says when it says, "Put not your trust in princes, or in the Son of Man, in whom there is no help. Happy is he that has the God of Jacob as his God, who puts their trust in the Lord. And I do think that there is kind of a strange thing that's happening, David, when you talked about, and I think it's a byproduct of kind of the Christian nationalism movement that paints him as this messianic Christ-like figure. And I think that, even for those who have an orientation to faith, I think it is creating, a context for an extreme disappointment, great delusion, the leading astray. And it's funny because I think even when we talk about false Christs and false prophets, I don't think it's just people claiming to be Jesus. But I think at the end of the day, what Jesus was alluding to with individuals that would have such powerful influence for whatever reason, that essentially we put them in Christ's stead. And I think that's a very dangerous and fundamentally flawed way to view any leader of any political persuasion.
Agreed. I share the sentiment with you. I too, when I first saw the news, the report about the assassination attempt, there was just so many different conflicting things. There were headlines that read he got hit by shards of glass from a teleprompter. There's just so many different little things, and then of course they've kind of all centralized around one theme now. But there were so many different things that were coming in fast pace. You almost felt like, is this a setup? But quickly we realized that there are people who have died. There was a gentleman that was behind him that died.
Yeah.
And so you immediately remove that from possibility, because you recognize, okay, this is not a joke anymore. Somebody actually died, and it could very well have been him as well. And so you under that kind of atmosphere, in that environment, as you think through what that could have meant, and that we are in a place where somebody felt strong enough to actually put pen to paper and plan an attack, to remove this person as an option. This warranted a response from the nation. And so you saw Biden get up and say, hey, we got to turn it down.
Correct.
Several leaders from Democratic and Republican parties have said this has gone way far.
Right.
And so I think we saw that, and we're seeing some reticence from both sides, I think, for maybe some things that have been said, maybe some stands that were taken. But we also see, as you mentioned, that fist that Trump put up right as he was being pulled off of stage, which has been tattooed on people's bodies, their T-shirts. They've sold out. It's crazy how that has become a symbol now. And you were correct. People putting him, I think it was David that said, putting him almost in a messianic light, where it's like, man, this guy that was protected of the angels, almost crowned to be the leader for this current moment. And then it is very dangerous for us to put any person of human descent in the category of Messiah, but also in the category of being the chosen one, if you will. So go ahead.
There was something else interesting, I think, Pastor Nugent, Pastor Snell, that we should tag on to this. People may not remember, but some months back, former President Trump gave a speech at, I think it was the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. I think that's what it was.
That's right.
It was definitely a collective.
Was that in Nashville?
I believe it was.
That's the one.
I think it was the one in Nashville, and I think it was NRB.
Yeah, NRB.
And at that convention, he said specifically, and this is not a direct quote, but it's a paraphrase. He said that he was going to essentially Christianize America. That he was going to, I think what he was suggesting by that is that he was going to promote legislation and policies that would bring God back into the public square. What's your, Pastor Snell, what's your reaction to that? And then we'll hear Pastor Nugent.
Sure.
Pastor Snell?
So I'll be honest with you. I think it's kind of comical for him of all people to say that. So again, this is not a partisan conversation. These are just my observations.
Right.
Even as a believer, I don't think that he is a religious person. I think it is a political maneuver, and this is not new. We've seen people like Herod, even in the Bible. He would kind of do certain things to placate the Jews for political force and rapport. And so I think that essentially you have somebody that leverages the values of the Christian community for their own gain, not really doing this as a lived conviction. And even as a believer, this is not something that I'm necessarily aligning myself with, because see, the influence of the Christian church, it was not designed to be through political legislation. The
Agreed.
witness of the Christian church is because we function in such Christ-like fashion that not through legislative force, but through the witness of being light in a dark world, of being salt that, affects, the flavor of whatever it touches through the preaching of the gospel. That's how our influence was supposed to spread in a fallen world. It was never supposed to be forced through legislation or through policy. Even these ideas fly in the face of why America itself was founded.
Agreed.
Primarily, one of those primary motifs or tenets was the idea of freedom of worship. That
Yeah.
was kind of the basis of this American experiment. And again, it just goes right in line with the prophecy of Revelation 13. Essentially, you have this beast that rises up out of the earth, that has the horns like a lamb, but he speaks like a dragon. In other words, has kind of the image or the persona of the lamb, Jesus, but in action and behavior, it functions and acts according to the dictates of another power, of the prince of darkness, Satan. And so I just think the Christian church has to be mindful of how we are to exert influence. It is through love. It is through our witness. It is through proclamation. And I think to a certain extent, we need to be able to have a certain political autonomy. When you look at John the Baptist, he was not politically like agnostic, but like, man, he was able to call a sinful Herod and Herodias into account because he was not bedfellows with them. He maintained a certain prophetic autonomy. And the Church of the Living God still has to do that and be willing to speak truth to power when it errs, as opposed to trying to be bedfellows with any political legislation or movement.
Agreed. I love that last part, that in talking about John the Baptist, because he not only spoke to the political powers of the day, he spoke to the religious powers as well. He spoke to
He
the
really did.
Sanhedrin, he spoke to the priests and teachers of the law, and called out their nonsense as well. So he was equal opportunity with his, and I think we as modern day believers have a responsibility to do the same. And I think there is a renewed emphasis on deception,
Yeah.
the term deception, because even with some of my Christian friends who belong to a different faith tradition, as I have
Yeah.
conversations with them about some of the things that we are seeing, one of the things that became very clear in the conversation was, by his actions, he's actually not Christian.
Right. Yes.
Trump by
Yes.
his action, just by
Right.
actions alone, is not Christian. So then, the whole shift and the bend and the focus and the aim to really play up this Christian aspect of his legislature and his leadership is interesting in that it is deception. It is
Yeah.
deception, and it isn't so much him as much as it is we doing it to ourselves. I found that to be
Yeah.
very interesting as well. I don't know if you wanted to chime in on that part as well,
But
David.
but if I could just add a point of reference though, you guys remember when in the book of Daniel where Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that he could not, so funny, he couldn't even remember it or interpret it,
Mercy.
and he was just like, called all of the astrologers and the magicians to tell him the dream and the interpretation
And
of the
the
dream,
interpretation.
and they were just like, man, nobody can do that. So eventually they lay hands on Daniel. God works through Daniel to bring back the remembrance of the dream and the interpretation of the dream. And it's funny because once Daniel shows up, like actually the king was actually ready to go ahead and now just destroy all of, what I'm saying, his wise men and astrologers. And it's funny because Daniel did not use that moment to leverage his influence to say, all right, nobody who doesn't believe like me, they should be persecuted or prosecuted.
Wow.
He actually came to their aid and their defense to say, listen, man, don't kill him, don't harm him. only God is able,
To do this.
to do this
Yeah.
thing that you requested. And essentially what Daniel did is he never exerted his spiritual or godly influence for political
So well
capital.
said. Yeah.
He used his godly influence actually to preserve those that had an opposing viewpoint or worldview, so that his influence was never going to be, he never designed it to be legislative. He never wanted it to be cemented through, the law of the Medes and the Persians.
Right.
He was light, he was salt.
Yeah.
And through the
Yeah.
favor and influence that God gave him, that's how he was able to impact, all right, Babylon and the Medo Persians. And it's the same way Joseph was able to
Yeah.
impact for the good or be a witness or light in Egypt. And that's the Christian's response in a fallen world. We are to be light and salt. Our love is going to distinguish us. It is not our politics. And I just think that's an errant approach or a broken approach, because I guess we feel like preaching doesn't work, witnessing doesn't work, love doesn't work. And it would work if we tried it.
If we
It would
tried it.
work if we demonstrated it. It would give us huge impact in a world that needs to know that Jesus saves them, and ultimately they need to know that Jesus is coming again.
Yeah.
So what I hear both of you really getting to is the fallacy of the argument about removing the wall between church and state.
Correct.
Absolutely.
You alluded, Pastor Snell, to Roger Williams, one of the founding fathers and one of the
Yeah.
founders of the Baptist Church, who actually is one of the main voices back 300 or so years ago to say we need to have a wall of separation. James Madison
Sure.
also said,
Yep.
and Thomas Jefferson,
Yep.
all three of them espoused this, and that's why we have in the First Amendment to the Constitution, the very first
Yep.
one, we
Very
have
first one.
this separation clause,
That's
right?
right.
Says Congress
Correct.
will make no law
No
to
law.
establish a religion or to prevent the free exercise of
That's
religion.
good.
Right?
Correct.
That's right. That's right.
Correct.
It's all there.
Yeah, and I think these ideas, even the idea of Christianizing a nation, what again, what if you have a candidate who is Muslim or Hindu, or they just don't believe, they're completely atheists, and then they make moves in a opposite or counter direction? Again, it's going to bring about such a fracturing of things. And it's funny because as Christians, again, have this fear of religious persecution, it's amazing how we change the sentiment once you have the power,
Yeah.
once you have the influence or the authority. And it shows that at the end of the day, that we sometimes in practice can be as intolerant and as ruthless as some who even acknowledge or hold the belief that there is no God or higher being.
Mercy. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's pivot now to the second major event in this
the headline.
news cycle that we've been talking
Yeah.
about, which is President Biden's
that's right.
decision to remove himself as a 2024 presidential candidate. Were you surprised by that, Pastor Snell, and what was your reaction to it?
Yeah, so so this has been kind of a progression as I'm kind of consuming this. So Pastor Nugent and I were laughing because I watched the debate I was
That's
in
right.
Cayman Islands preaching from start to finish. And so my takeaway was pretty different than a lot of people's, because I didn't really see anything that surprised me. Like, I saw in Biden who he has been, and
Yeah.
Trump he stayed true to character, like who he was. And so the reaction to me was pretty stunning to me. Like I did feel like it wasn't a great political performance by President Biden, but I was like, that's kind of what we've been seeing. So I think that the one thing I was wondering, because in my mind it felt like an overreaction. It felt like the spin was just going out of control. And I felt like, it may actually harm things going forward. So I guess the one thing that I'm still curious about is, with this bout of COVID, are there some underlying health challenges that maybe accelerated or pushed him? Or were there some things that are coming to light with his physical health? Because everything in terms of the messaging of what had been communicated seemed to be pretty clear that he was determined to finish the work that he felt like he was called to do. So I was actually pretty shocked by it, even though I guess there were some who kind of were leaking or suggesting. I think Nancy Pelosi was kind of alluding to the fact that maybe there was still ambivalence or uncertainty, but his messaging was really clear. So it just kind of led me to really wonder if there is something else at work beside just concern for party. That's just one of my thoughts.
So what Pastor Snell is referring to is, of course, we have a show that's called What Just Happened, and myself, Pastor Snell, and Danita Jones, we talked about a number of things, but one of the things was that debate and our responses to it. And so he shared in that conversation, of course, what he just shared now. I personally could not watch the debate. I couldn't watch the whole thing, at least. It was just, cringeworthy is all I could do was just like, oh my goodness. The thought is not finished. It's half sentences. But so I will say that I was surprised when he dropped out, because all of the messaging prior had been, no. We're forging forward. I'm strong. I'm ready. I'm able. I'm willing to do this. And so I agree. I think there was something that was a catalyst, and maybe it was this bout of COVID, but something was a catalyst that kind of pushed him over the edge to say, maybe it may be best for me to step aside. I don't know if there were numbers involved. I don't know if they ran some stuff and said, maybe I don't stack up as well as Kamala does against our opponent. But it was Sunday I heard that news, and I was blown away. I had to pause and say, whoa, this is big.
But David, you know what? I had a very, I don't know, it may be kind of the leader or pastor sensitivity in me that maybe had this thought. But I think even as I listened to him talk and give his endorsement in a way that seemed very authentic to me of Vice President Harris, I think that when you're in a position of leadership or you're in a position of service to other people, I think your service to others, like the Bible says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, as if you're serving God and not man. And the reason I'm saying that is because it was it was a little heartbreaking to see how people changed their mind about him in an instant. I mean, people pivoted so quickly. And completely were just kind of ready to kind of, politically throw him overboard. Not personally, but politically throw him overboard. But I think one of the things that I think, if my sense of the man is correct, that his service was unto people cause. And so even when people changed their mind, he did not regret his service, because his service was not about him, his family, or his reputation, but his service was about his mission and his cause. I think that this is really critical for anybody who is in a leadership or service position, because at the end of the day, people are not going to always ride with you. They're not going to always appreciate you. They're not always going to value what you do. And if you do whatever it is that you do for the applause and the support and the acclaim of people, when people change their mind, you will regret serving or participating or doing what you do. And that's why I just think that whatever we do, this podcast, our preaching, our teaching, whatever we do, we have to do it unto God and not unto man. Because at the end of the day, people will change their mind. I think of Saul. And it's funny because David didn't do anything to Saul, but Saul heard these young women say, like, Saul has killed his thousands, and David has killed his 10,000s. And it completely sends him over the edge. I mean, it's kind of funny because, what they were saying wasn't even true. David was just a Johnny-come-lately. Saul was the first king. He helped them establish a nation. He had bled for them, fought wars for them. But people change their minds very quickly.
Yeah, they do.
But if your service is for the acclaim of people, when people shift, you lose your identity, you lose your worth, and you lose your value. And I think, again, I don't know Biden. Can't claim to know his heart. But when I saw his enthusiastic support of the vice president, or his expressions of for the good of country, it seems to suggest that, okay, I realized that my service was for others and not for
For
myself. Whether that's
myself.
true or not, I think that's the lesson. One of the lessons we can take away from it.
That's good. That's a good takeaway.
Yeah, very good takeaway. So, as you both know, in my life outside of Breathe, I'm very much in the world of journalism and politics and secular media as a producer and personality. And I can tell you that some of the things that you've alluded to are true. There were numbers run. Absolutely, there were numbers run.
Yeah.
And those numbers were presented to President Biden by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. And Senate Minority Leader, or House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. So they did run numbers. And I knew for sure when Congressman Adam Schiff came out and said that Biden needed to step down, I knew that the tide was turning.
Wow.
Because what that signaled was that Nancy Pelosi, who is, even though she's not the House Minority Leader anymore, she still is at the seat of power there.
Correct.
That she had signaled him to do that. And that was their way to say, basically, Mr. President, if you don't make a decision, we've talked to you privately. We've made the case.
Yeah.
So if you don't make the right decision privately or on your own,
come to
then
this
we're
conclusion.
going to have to start taking this to the public.
Yeah.
And that was, now other people had said things prior to Schiff, but Schiff and Pelosi are like this.
There you go.
And so that was the signal that, hey, okay, now I need to really, I need to step back and really decide what I'm going to do here.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of strategy that goes into these things. I do not imagine that they're done haphazardly or reactionary, I should say. There's homework that's done. They've charted out some kind of a course, and that's what I said to some friends when we talked about it on Sunday, because they were just kind of lamenting, like, oh my goodness, how are we even going to find someone to support in this short amount of time? The election is in November, so but it's an interesting scenario. Go ahead,
Dave. I have a question. Like in your inner world, in your work and things that you hear, is it possible? And I've read this on one blog that would suggest the reason they did the debate so early. Some felt like that they, well, again, I can't say whether or not this was true, but that they wanted to expose certain weaknesses in the president early enough so that a pivot can be made. Have you heard anything along those lines?
I think there's a logic out there that suggests that. There is a line of thinking out there that embraces that point of view. Of course, not being privy to the actual negotiations or having heard any leaks from the actual negotiations, I can't say for sure, but it seems logical. It seems as though at the very least the thought was, giving the Biden campaign the benefit of the doubt, at the very least the thought process was, let's get one in early, let's see how things go, and then we will have enough time to recover and make adjustments with the second debate, which of course is going to be after the Democratic National Convention in August. So I think there was a logic there to benefit the president, but it could also be that in some subterranean room somewhere, there were people talking about, hey, this can help us to set up the chessboard this way so that we can have this, what we now have. Politics.
I did notice that debate was early. I mean, because neither of them were the nominee during that debate. So that was a little. I mean, maybe there is precedence. I don't know if there's historical precedence for that to have the two front runners of either party debate even before either of the conventions.
Right. Well, I think both of them were considered the presumptive nominees because there was no real, nobody was really running against them of any consequence. In fact, I'm trying to remember if Biden even had a.
No.
I don't know. That he
completely
even had
uncontested.
Anybody.
You're right.
So you had Robert Kennedy out there.
Kennedy, the independent.
Cornel West out there is with, I think, the Green Party and Jill Stein, I think also. But nobody was considering them really.
Not Democrat, not Democrat, and Republicans. Everybody had kind of dropped out at that point. So that makes sense. That makes sense.
So before we run out of time here, let's get to the third major event, which is the ascension of Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
She's she now is, as of the recording of this podcast, she now has enough delegates
That's correct.
to be the Democratic nominee for the presidency of the United States. That's historic.
That's already historic.
And
right?
and whether or not you support her or don't support her or support the Democratic Party or not, it's history in the making.
That's correct.
It is. Yep.
And she will do, if she is elected, she will achieve what Hillary Clinton wasn't able to do.
Agreed.
Right? And
Correct.
what and many years before her, what Shirley Chisholm wasn't able
That's
to
correct.
do.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. What are your thoughts, pastors, about the ascension of Kamala Harris and what that may mean for the nation? Pastor Snell?
Yeah, it's a lot of thoughts. I do think just as an African American with a daughter, just the
Yes.
symbolism.
That's correct.
As I sat down with my daughter Brooke, and I guess it became clear that she's going to perhaps be the presumptive candidate for the Democratic Party. You can just see a light and an interest, like, wow, somebody that kind of looks like me and kind of represents kind of my look and my worldview and my experience. So I just think that innately, I just think it is immense that in this country with the racial history, that, perhaps, just 8 short years after Barack Obama, that we're in a position to where at least a good portion of the country is able to bypass gender and race, whether she becomes a president or not, to say, all right, we think she can represent our interests. And I just think that is huge and immense, even of itself. And so I'm interested to see how it's going to play out. I do think that there are a lot of different hurdles that she will have to cross, and I'm not even sure if race is the biggest one. I am still curious, to see if we as a nation are willing to be led by a female. I think that may be just as much of a challenge for some as the color of her skin.
Agreed.
And so I just think that's going to be an interesting thing to see if it unfolds, if she's able to get messaging that takes traction, gain the trust of those that may be kind of in the middle of the road, so to speak. And I think that there's a sense for some that they just don't really know her. Because one of the things I think is really interesting, David and Kirk, is at the end of the day, the president of the United States, in a lot of ways, it boils down just like a high school popularity contest. For a lot of people, personality weighs way more than policy, track record, character. And I do think that we are a lesser nation because of that. So I don't know. Those are some of my first thoughts.
I think I share the same sentiments as a girl dad as well. That this is major. This is major. This is a moment. There's a glass ceiling that has been broken, and you can strive for more. You can hope for more. You can dream for greater than what you could have prior. But one of the things I do find interesting is, of course, the vice president, unless you as a person do your work to follow what they're doing, they can get lost in the sauce, essentially.
It is.
So
Sure.
for the better part of the last 4 years, many are just like, I don't even really know what she's been doing. I don't know what has she been spearheading, what has she been over. So there is very much, as you mentioned, that question mark of what does this actually mean? We know her prior to being the vice president, but what will this mean for her going forward? And then there's the other huge question mark of who will be the running mate. And I think that's going to be a major component in this as well, and how quickly they're able to vet and find somebody, and then what those considerations are as we go into that as well. There's a number of things that come into mind, but just from on its surface, I think there are many countries, I've lived outside of the States, who have had strong female leadership for years. It has not been an issue whatsoever. This would be the first here for this particular country, but it is in no way the first, leader on that scale or that level for women in total across the board in terms of the entire world. So there is something to be said for that as well. Go ahead.
It's interesting, and that's why I think that gender thing is going to be really curious. Because even when I think back with Hillary Clinton, regardless of how you felt about her, she kind of had I guess, kind of a political, what some would describe as a political ruthlessness about her. But I think that's only an issue because she's a woman. If she was a man,
Agreed. Yeah.
I don't really think that really would have really been an issue. And even with some of the early criticism of Vice President Harris, is what has she done? We don't know who she is, her personality, so on and so forth. I think that speaks to gender as well, because even when you think back to, say, when anybody else was a president, like, did you really know who Al Gore was while Clinton was president?
No.
Until he stepped out into the shadows, for himself.
Right.
Did you really know who
Biden.
George Bush was? You know what I'm saying? Before, until Reagan was done, or the same thing with Biden. And so vice presidents generally they tend to operate in the shadows, in support of the president. They tend to have kind of a sterile posture so that they don't really, run ahead. So I think she's essentially executed her duty. She's played her role.
Agreed.
But I think sometimes because she's a female, or maybe because she's African American, we're kind of making assumptions that maybe we should not make, simply because she did the job that she was assigned to do.
I totally agree. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. It's a great way to kind of wrap the whole thing up. There is one last thing I do want to share. I do believe there's some conversations around Kamala, Vice President Harris, bringing out that excitement. So you talked about that gleam in your daughter's eye. There is a generation that is of voting age currently who was not there for Obama. Did not get to be a part of that particular moment, and they recognize that we're on the cusp of something as well here. And so that momentum may be able to bring people out to the polls who had already said, this is a foregone conclusion, I will not vote. And so I think there's a lot of different dynamics at play now that we have this candidate as the presumptive nominee to be able to consider as we go into this and as we look at the future for our country.
So last night, the night before this taping, there was a gathering of black men online. I think about close to 20,000 black men.
Oh, wow.
Online, convened by Roland Martin and some other personalities and influencers. I think the last figure I saw was over $1.2 million was raised from those men who were online. I know previous to that, there was a convening of black women, and that was Sunday night, actually. Sunday night, and it was the same sort of thing. Right. Thousands of them raising money.
There's energy.
And of course, Vice President Harris has the added advantage of already being plugged into a substantial network of black people through her, through the fact that she's sorority Alpha Kappa Alpha, and also is a graduate of Howard University.
Correct.
So it's going to be interesting to see how that particular part of the Democratic Party's voting base and the independent voting base, and even some Republicans too who fall to those categories, how they will come together. And let's see what kind of impact they have. It's going to be interesting.
It's going to be interesting.
Before we go, pastors, I want to just take a moment to say we lost someone who was important not only to Congress, but to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And that's Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee.
Yeah, that was surprising.
Died of pancreatic cancer. Wow. Just a week or so ago, or maybe a little less. And I think it's fitting that since we're having this conversation, we should take at least a couple of quick minutes to reflect on the life and legacy of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who at one time was on the board of our own
Yep.
alma mater, our beloved alma mater, Oakwood University.
That's right.
Pastor Snell.
Yeah, I think just a couple succinct thoughts that come to mind. I think sometimes the word trailblazer can be thrown around a little bit too loosely. But I think that, I think it appropriately applies to her. I think she's a person that in her personal life and in her professional work, that was certainly the one that had to go before and to face the opposition. You know how in football they have this position player called the fullback.
The fullback.
And the fullback doesn't get the glory to shine. Their whole job is to punch a hole in the line, and kind of sacrifice themselves so that momentum and forward movement can take place. And she kind of came to being at a time where people that looked like her, both racially and their gender, there was very little space and margin for them to operate, but she operated with integrity and courage, and yet she was still firm with her Christian values and expressive with them, and representing them in her private world and in public space. And it's funny because it just shows that nobody gets there by themselves, because even as we talk about Kamala Harris, the only reason there could be a Kamala Harris is because you have someone like Miss Sheila that went before, kind of paved the ground, established, a credibility, and created space for her to even be able to kind of stand on those shoulders. And so our condolences to her family, her church family, and we as a church community, we mourn with them as they move through this season of grief.
Yeah, that's well said. I think what I was going to say is, of course, that link between the two. It's because of people like Sheila Jackson Lee. Of course, we now have, the door open for somebody like Kamala Harris. But I will say, Sheila Jackson Lee, somebody that is a friend of this community in particular, somebody who has been here with us, who has lent her support and her influence and her gravitas towards not just Oakwood University Church, but also Breath of Life. So we just celebrate that life and the legacy that she leaves behind, recognizing that while the family, of course, is in this time of grief, and those who knew her and loved her in this time of grief and mourning and loss, but we can celebrate all that she had accomplished, all that she represents, and someone can pick up that torch and continue it forward.
I like to think of her as a modern Daniel.
Agreed.
Agreed. And as I think back, I know there have been other Seventh-day Adventist congressional people, and even other Seventh-day Adventists who have been elected to public office in major ways, like John Street, former mayor of Philadelphia. But honestly, I don't know that I can't think of a Seventh-day Adventist who has gained more prominence, more national prominence as a politician than Sheila Jackson Lee.
Agreed.
She's the Daniel, or was the Daniel of our day. In my opinion.
Amen.
Well said.
Currently.
Well said.
Well, Pastor Snell, I guess you want to go work on your tan some more, huh? I guess that's what you want to do.
Hey, David, as you can see, I really need one.
Oh my!
We know what you're doing.
That's it.
After he finishes preaching, he's out there. He's out there on the beach. I know what you're doing.
Hey,
know what you're doing.
This is where he hears from God. You see?
That's it. You got to go to the mountains or by the water. To the mountains or by the water. That's it.
Well, God bless you as you continue to do God's work in California.
Absolutely.
We'll see you back here soon in
right.
the Breath of Life complex here in Huntsville. Pastor Nugent, always good to see you.
Always, man.
Yeah.
And
to our viewers and listeners, don't forget, no matter how challenging life may be, you can always stop, pray, and breathe. God bless you.
God bless.
Breathe is produced by David Person for Breath of Life. Executive producer is Debliere Snell, and sound engineer is Kirk Nugent. Audio episodes of Breathe can be found on Apple, Spotify, or Google podcast platforms. For video episodes and extra content, check out the Breath of Life YouTube channel. Breath of Life is faith-based content, resources, and programs from a contemporary urban perspective for those looking for hope and guidance. We believe that every breath we take is a testimony that God is consistent, that He loves us, and has a plan for our lives.